My name is Laura, and if you told me a few years ago that a half-soaked ball of fur hiding under a parked car would lead me straight to the love of my life, I would have laughed and said you'd been watching too many romantic comedies. At 58, I wasn't exactly in the meet cute in the rain phase of life anymore. Those days, my world was pretty small. My little townhouse at the edge of a quiet Pennsylvania suburb, my job at the local community college library, my weekly phone calls with my daughter, Amy, and the occasional dinner with a friend who, like me, had grown accustomed to going home to a quiet house. I had made my peace with being alone, or at least, that's what I told myself. On the day it all began, the sky had been threatening rain since morning. Slow, stubborn clouds that hang there, heavy and gray, like they're trying to make up their minds. I remember standing at the front window with a mug of coffee, watching the wind fuss with the trees lining our street. Make up your mind, I muttered. Rain or don't. This in-between is murder on my hair. I had errands to run, groceries, a prescription refill, dropping off a stack of donated books at the thrift store, and I knew if I didn't leave soon, I'd be walking through a downpour. My umbrella had disappeared somewhere between the trunk of my car and the hall closet, and I hadn't yet summoned the energy to dig for it. I pulled on my old waterproof jacket, the one with a stubborn zipper and a small tear near the cuff, and slipped my feet into sensible sneakers. Before I left, I did what I always do, walked through the little townhouse, checking window locks, turning off lights, and straightening things that didn't need straightening. It's funny, the habits you keep when you live alone. I'll fluff the same cushion 3 times in a day just because it's there. The air outside smelled like wet pavement and cold. Not full-on rain yet, but the edges of it, the way it smells right before the sky finally gives in. I pulled my hood up and made my way down the sidewalk toward the small town center, where most of what I needed could be found within a few blocks. By the time I came out of the pharmacy, balancing a paper bag and my purse while trying to fold the receipt into my wallet, the drizzle had started. Soft at first, then more insistent. People around me hunched their shoulders and picked up their pace. A few umbrellas bloomed open like flowers. Of course, I sighed, tucking the bag more securely under my arm. I decided to cut through the side street behind the shops to get to the parking lot more quickly. Pavement, there was uneven, little puddles forming in the dips. The rain tapped against my hood, and a gust of wind sent a spray of droplets right into my face. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the squeak of a loose gate or maybe a bird complaining about the weather. But as I walked a few more steps, the sound came again, high, thin, and pitiful. A tiny cry. I stopped. There it was again. A desperate, broken little meow. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the alley. There were a few parked cars, a dumpster, a stack of wooden pallets against a brick wall, and a row of recycling bins. But no cats in sight. "Hello," I called softly, feeling a little foolish talking to the air. "Where are you, sweetheart?" The answer was another small, strangled cry. I followed the sound, wading carefully around a growing puddle until I reached the row of parked cars. The noise was louder here, somewhere low to the ground. I crouched down, my knees protesting, and peered beneath a silver sedan. 2 wide, frightened eyes stared back at me from the shadows. A tiny kitten, drenched and shivering, crouched just behind the front tire. Its fur, what I could see of it, was a mix of gray and white, plastered to its skinny frame. Each raindrop that hit the pavement sent a small shudder through its body. "Oh, honey," I breathed. "What are you doing out here?" The kitten backed up a little, pressing itself even closer to the inner part of the wheel well. "It's okay," I murmured, lowering myself a little more, ignoring the damp seeping into the knees of my jeans. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." My heart clenched in that way it does when you see something small and helpless. I've always been a soft touch for stray animals, even though I hadn't had a pet of my own since our family dog passed away years ago. Life had gotten busy, then complicated, then quiet. I told myself it wasn't fair to bring an animal into that shifting ground. That moment, with rain dripping off my hood and a kitten's terrified eyes on mine, all those practical thoughts scattered. A car door slammed somewhere behind me, making the kitten flinch. "Easy," I whispered. "We're okay, just you and me right now." I glanced around, half expecting someone to appear and say, "Oh, there you are, that's my kitten." But the alley was empty, just the sound of rain, traffic from the main road, and that tiny, desperate cry. "Okay, Laura," I told myself under my breath. Think. It wasn't like I could reach under the car and grab the poor thing. It would bolt or scratch me to pieces, and I'd deserve it. I needed something to coax it out. I set my pharmacy bag down carefully and rooted around in my purse. No food, of course, just receipts, a spare mask, my keys, and a slightly squished granola bar. "Not exactly gourmet," I muttered, peeling back the wrapper. I broke off a small piece and slid it across the wet ground, close to the edge of the car. "Here you go, sweetheart," I said. "Not cat food, but it's something." The kitten watched me with suspicion, ears twitching. Another fat raindrop landed on my wrist and rolled down my sleeve. We stayed like that for a minute or two, me, crouched awkwardly, knees burning, trying to look as non-threatening as a middle-aged woman in a raincoat can look. The kitten, a tight ball of fear and bones. Finally, it inched forward. Just one paw, then another. "That's it," I encouraged softly. "Brave little thing." It sniffed the granola piece, then, apparently deciding hunger outweighed caution, licked at it tentatively. I could see now just how small it was. Maybe 8 weeks old. Too young to be out here alone in this weather. "Where's your mama, huh?" I murmured. "Did she get scared off? Did someone leave you?" My throat tightened at the thought. I broke off another bit and placed it a little closer to me, closer to the edge of the car. Kitten hesitated, then followed the food, step by tiny step, until it was just beyond the wheel, half in shadow, half in the dim, gray light. When it reached the second piece, I could see it clearly now. Ragged fur, mud on its paws, little pink nose, and those big, searching eyes. "You're a heartbreaker, you know that," I whispered. I moved slowly, easing one hand forward, palm up, as if I were offering not just food but a question. "Do you want to come with me?" I asked quietly. "You want to get out of this rain?" For a second, it froze. We just looked at each other, the rain hitting the pavement in a soft drumbeat all around us. Then, with a tiny, almost resigned sigh, the kitten stepped toward my hand and pressed its head gently into my palm. Something inside me cracked wide open. "Oh," I breathed, my eyes stinging. Okay, that's a yes." Moving as carefully as I could, I scooped the kitten up against my chest. Its body was so light, it hardly felt like anything at all, except for the sharp, fragile thump of its heartbeat against my palm. It let out one small, protesting MRRP, and then tucked its head under my chin, as if it had already decided I was safer than whatever the world had offered it so far. My jacket absorbed the rain from its fur and offered it my warmth in return. I stood up slowly, joints complaining, and looked around the alley one last time. No posters, no worried owners calling a name, just the long, wet stretch of asphalt and a few empty cars. "All right," I said, tightening my hold on the little body in my arms. "You're coming home with me." The walk back to my car felt longer somehow, every step measured, my whole awareness narrowed to the small life pressed against me. The rain picked up, and by the time I reached the parking lot, it had graduated from drizzle to steady sheet. Inside the car, I gently placed the kitten on the passenger seat. Immediately curled into a tight ball, shivering, eyes half closed. "You and me both, kid," I murmured, turning the heat up. My brain started its familiar practical march. You don't have pet food at home. No litter box. No vet lined up. What if it's sick? What if you can't afford this? I started the car and sat there for a moment, watching the wipers struggle against the growing rain. "I can't just leave you," I said softly, as if answering my own doubts. "We'll figure it out." On the drive home, I made a detour to the nearest big box store. I left the engine running for a moment to keep the car warm, whispering to the kitten, "I'll be right back. I promise, then sprinted inside to the pet aisle. A bag of kitten food, a small litter box and litter, a simple collar I wasn't sure it would tolerate, a few cans of wet food. Total stung a bit when I saw it at the register, but I swallowed that sting with the same quiet determination I'd used on so many grocery trips. You did the right thing, I told myself. Back home, I carried the kitten inside tucked in my jacket again, my chest damp and my heart oddly full. I set it gently on a folded towel in the bathroom, the smallest room in the house, figuring it would be easier to contain any chaos. The kitten blinked up at me, ears flicking. "Welcome to Casa Laura," I said. "It's not much, but it's dry." I filled a small dish with water and another with a little wet food, the smell hitting me as I peeled back the lid. "There you go," I said, sliding them closer. The kitten sniffed cautiously, then ate like it hadn't seen food in days. It probably hadn't. Watching it, something settled in my chest. A tiny, furry guest had turned my quiet house into something else entirely. It had eaten and drunk. I ran a warm, damp washcloth gently over its fur, wiping away the worst of the mud and grime. It protested at first, tiny paws pushing against my hand, but eventually it relaxed, eyes drooping. "You're a mess," I murmured. "We'll need to get you to vet. Make sure you're okay." As I stroked its head with one finger, I realized I was smiling, really smiling, in a way I hadn't in a long time. "This is crazy," I said out loud, half laughing. I went out for vitamins and came home with a kitten. The kitten cracked one eye open, looked at me, and let out a small, satisfied purr. I felt it rumble against my palm, that soft little engine of contentment. "All right," I said. "Maybe crazy is what we needed." I didn't know it then, but that tiny, rain-soaked creature on my bathroom towel had just ripped a door open in my life that I thought had been firmly closed. Through that door would walk more noise, more mess, more fur on the furniture than I cared to think about, and somehow, the person I'd been quietly hoping for, but had long since stopped expecting to meet. At that moment, though, it was just me and a kitten, the sound of rain against the window, and a feeling in my chest I hadn't had in years. The sense that something new was beginning. For the first few days, my life rearranged itself around 6 pounds of fur. I had intended for the bathroom to be a temporary landing spot, a safe little island while we figured each other out. But the kitten had other ideas. Within 24 hours, it had explored every corner of that small room, climbed into the laundry basket, knocked over a roll of toilet paper, and decided that the bath mat was its personal kingdom. By the second night, every time I opened the door, it would dart past my ankles and make a break for the hallway. "All right, Houdini," I said, scooping it up for the 5th time. "I get the message." It was time to admit that this wasn't just a rescue. This was a new resident. I moved the litter box to the corner of the laundry area and set up a little feeding station in the kitchen, 2 small ceramic bowls on an old tray, one for water, one for food. The kitten followed me everywhere, tiny paws silent on the laminate flooring, tail held high. Now that it was dry and a bit cleaner, I could see its coloring more clearly. Soft gray fur with white paws and a white chin, like someone had dipped its feet and face in milk. A faint tabby pattern on its sides that caught the light when it moved. And those eyes, big, round, and a shade somewhere between green and gold. "You are entirely too pretty to have been left under a car," I told it as it watched me from the kitchen doorway, sitting with its tail wrapped neatly around its paws like a little cat statue. Blinked slowly, as if to say, "I know." I hadn't meant to name it. I told myself I'd just call it Kitten until I figured out what to do. But names have a way of arriving on their own. On the 3rd day, I was sitting on the living room floor, sorting through a box of old photographs I'd taken down from the closet. The kitten trotted over and plopped itself right in the middle of a picture of my daughter at 5 years old, wearing a crooked paper crown. "Hey," I said, "you can't sit there. It's important." It batted at the edge of the photo, then then at the cuff of my jeans, then rolled onto its back, paws in the air, as if to say, everything you think is important is now secondary to me. I laughed out loud. You are such a little storm, I said, blowing through my life and rearranging everything. Storm. The word stuck in my mind. I picked up the kitten and held it up so we were face to face. What do you think? I asked. Storm, because you showed up with the rain and turned my day upside down. It tilted its head, blinked once, then reached one tiny paw out to pat my nose. Storm it is, I said. Nice to officially meet you. From that moment on, Storm lived up to the name. Yes, the vet would later confirm he was a little boy threw himself into life with a kind of reckless enthusiasm. He chased dust motes in the sunlight like they were rare and precious prey. He ambushed my ankles from behind the couch. He climbed onto the back of my recliner and launched himself at the pull cord on the ceiling fan, sending it swinging like a carnival ride. He was a one-cat circus, and my quiet house suddenly had a soundtrack again. The patter of paws, the rattle of a toy, the soft rumble of purring in the evenings. Of course, along with the joy came the practicalities. On the second day, he sneezed, a tiny, squeaky explosion that would have been adorable if it hadn't come in a cluster. Oh, I said, watching him wipe his nose with a paw. We might have a problem. A few more sneezes and a bit of discharge from one eye later, and I will get to a vet eventually. Plan turned into call a vet first thing in the morning. Finding a veterinarian who could see us on short notice wasn't easy. The first 2 clinics I called were booked solid. The third had a voicemail message that sounded like it hadn't been updated since 1998. The fourth, though, picked up on the second ring. Morning, Maple Grove Veterinary Clinic. This is Kitten. How can I help you? A cheerful voice chirped in my ear. I explained the situation. Found a stray kitten in the rain, brought him home, now sneezing and a little gunky around the eyes. My voice had that half-apologetic tone it gets when I feel like I'm asking for more than I'm allowed. Poor little guy, Kitten said. We definitely want to take a look at him. Let me see. We've had a cancellation tomorrow afternoon at 3. Can you make that? Glanced at my calendar, the one that, until this week, had been mostly empty squares. Yes, I said. We can be there. Great, she replied. What's your name? And his, if he has one. I hesitated for half a second, then smiled. I'm Laura, I said, and his name is Storm. Storm, she repeated, amused. I like that. We'll see you and Storm tomorrow at 3. The next day, I loaded Storm into a borrowed cat carrier from a neighbor. He did not appreciate the gesture. At the time I'd latched the little metal door, he'd let out a series of offended wails that sounded like I was personally responsible for every injustice in the world. It's for your own good, I told him as I carried him to the car. Trust me, we want the doctor to say you're fine. At the clinic, the waiting room was bright and smelled faintly of disinfectant and something floral. A golden retriever lay near the chairs, gently wagging its tail, while a woman with red-rimmed eyes stroked its head. A teenager sat in the corner with a rabbit carrier on her lap, scrolling through her phone. Behind the desk, Kitten smiled as soon as she saw us. You must be Laura and Storm, she said. Welcome. Storm, to his credit, had gone quiet, his wide eyes taking in the strange noises and smells. Is he a new adoption? Kitten asked as she handed me a clipboard with forms. Something like that, I said. He found me in a parking lot. That's how the best ones arrive, she replied with a grin. Filled out the paperwork, circling, found stray, under where did you get your pet? An unknown, underage. My hand shook just a little as I signed my name, committing to a level of responsibility I hadn't anticipated when I left the house for prescriptions 2 days earlier. When the vet tech called us back, I carried the carrier into the exam room and set it on the metal table. Storm plastered himself against the back wall of the carrier, ears flat, eyes huge. Hey there, handsome, the tech cooed, peering in. You've been through a lot, huh? She opened the door with practiced speed and scooped him up before he could protest too much. He let out one indignant squeak, then went quiet as she held him against her chest, scratching gently under his chin. I'm Jenna, she said to me. We'll get his weight and temperature. Then Dr. Collins will come in to see you. Storm endured the indignities of being weighed and having his temperature taken with surprisingly little drum. I suspect he was too overwhelmed to resist. A few minutes later, the vet walked in. Hi there, I'm Dr. Collins, he said, offering his hand. You must be Storm's new human. I shook his hand, noting the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes and the flecks of gray at his temples. He looked to be around my age, late 50s, maybe a bit older, with a calm, steady way of moving that made the room feel less clinical. I suppose I am, I said. I'm Laura. He smiled and turned his attention to Storm, who was now sitting in the middle of the table, fur puffed slightly, tail wrapped tight. Well, Storm, he said in a warm, conversational tone, let's see what we've got here. He moved gently, letting Storm sniff his fingers first before lifting him carefully. As he examined the kitten eyes, ears, mouth, paws, he narrated what he was doing in plain language, more for my benefit than Storm's. Looks like we've got a bit of an upper respiratory infection, he said, peering at the corners of Storm's eyes. Pretty common in kittens that have been out on their own. Nothing we can't handle. His lungs sound good, heart sounds strong. He's underweight, but that's not surprising. Relief loosened my shoulders. So he'll be okay, I asked. With some antibiotics, good food, and a warm place to sleep. I'd say his prognosis is excellent, Dr. Collins replied. You did a good thing getting him out of the elements. I felt my face flush a little. It didn't feel like a choice, I admitted. Once I heard him crying under that car, he nodded, a knowing look crossing his face. Funny how they do that, he said. They pick us, and then we spend the rest of our lives thinking we were the ones who saved them. He gave Storm one last, gentle scratch behind the ears, then turned back to me. Get you some meds, and talk about vaccines and neutering when he's a bit stronger, he said. Any questions? A dozen fluttered through my mind about food, about litter, about behavior, but the one that came out surprised even me. How do you do it? I asked. See so many animals that have been abandoned or hurt and not break. He leaned against the counter for a moment, looking thoughtful. Some days are harder than others, he said. But then there are people like you. People who go out for errands and come home with a wet, scared kitten. People who choose to care when they didn't have to. That helps. Our eyes met for a heartbeat longer than strictly necessary. Then Jenna popped her head in, holding a small bottle. Got his meds ready, she said. And a little welcome kit from the Rescue Fund starter food. A toy, that sort of thing. Perfect, Dr. Collins said, straightening. See, the universe is on your side today, Storm. On the drive home, Storm slept in the carrier, the worst of his fear apparently soothed by a firm diagnosis and a gentle pair of hands. My mind, however, was awake and buzzing. There had been something in the way Dr. Collins had looked at me, something in the way he said people like you, that stirred a part of me I'd carefully set aside. Stop it, I scolded myself silently. He's a vet. He's kind to everyone. You're here for Cat, not a crush. Still, when I got home and set the carrier down in the living room, my cheeks were warm. Storm, for his part, emerged from the carrier, stretched, and immediately found the patch of sun near the window. Of course, I said, you find the best seat in the house and claim it. He blinked at me, then flopped onto his side, as if to say, obviously. Over the next few weeks, Storm settled into my life like he'd been waiting for it. His sneezes faded with the antibiotics. His fur grew softer and thicker. His belly rounded out with regular meals. He discovered the joy of batting at the pull strings on my blinds, the thrill of racing down the hallway at full speed for no apparent reason, and the comfort of curling up on my chest in the evenings while I watched television. He also discovered that the best time to walk across my laptop keyboard was precisely when I was trying to pay bills or answer emails. I took more photos of him than I'd taken of anything in years. My daughter started texting me, "Okay, crazy cat lady, send me today's Storm picture," with laughing emojis. One Saturday afternoon, as Storm was crouched in the window watching birds with laser focus, My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Laura," it read. "This is Dr. Collins from Maple Grove. Just checking in, how is Storm doing?" I stared at the screen, surprised. Vets usually left follow-up calls to their staff. Glanced at Storm, who had now moved on from bird watching to attacking a dust bunny in the corner, and snapped a quick photo of him mid-pounce. "He's thriving," I typed back. "Acts like he's always lived here. Thank you again for taking such good care of him." I attached the photo before I could overthink it. A moment later, the little typing dots appeared. "That's great to hear," came the reply. "He's lucky you found him. And that's an impressive pounce. Olympic level, I'd say." I smiled. "Perhaps we should enter him in some competitions," I wrote. "Category: best at knocking things off tables." "Ah, a classic," he responded. "If you ever want tips on keeping him out of trouble, or at least convincing him he's out of trouble, let me know. I'm always happy to talk about cats." I paused, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. "This is just a vet being friendly," I told myself. "Don't read into it." "Careful," I finally typed. "I might take you up on that. Storm has big plans for this household." "Good," he replied. "Households with big plans tend to be the best kind." We didn't text constantly after that, but every couple of weeks, a small exchange would pop up. A quick question about Storm's appetite, a suggestion for a new toy. Once, a picture he sent of a particularly ridiculous cat that someone had donated to the clinic. "They expect actual cats to sleep in this," he'd written. "I think it's a trap." I found myself looking forward to those little messages more than I wanted to admit. One evening, as Storm snored gently on my lap, and I scrolled through our text thread, my daughter called. "So," Amy said after we'd covered the basics, work, her kids, the usual, "how's the furry grandchild?" "Demanding," I said, "and adorable. In that order," she laughed. "I still can't believe you got a cat," she said. "You always said you weren't ready." "I wasn't," I replied. "Until I was." "Funny how that works," she said. "Any cute vets in the picture?" "I've seen enough movies to know how this goes." I rolled my eyes, even though she couldn't see it. "There's a vet," I admitted. "He's very kind, but he's also busy, professional, and probably very married." "Probably," she pounced. "Have you looked at his ring finger?" "I wasn't staring at his hands," I protested. Then, after a pause, "Much." "Mom," she said, laughter in her voice, but something else too. "Not saying you need a man to be happy. You've built a good life. But you're allowed to want more than a good cat and some nice coworkers, you know." Her words landed in that quiet place inside me that still sometimes ached. "It's been a long time," I said softly. "I know," she replied, "but long doesn't mean over." After we hung up, I sat there in the dim light of the living room, Storm's warmth steady against my legs, and thought about the life I'd built since my divorce. It had been years, more than a decade, since I'd shared my home with anyone other than myself. I'd convinced myself that was safer, easier. Pets were simple. People were not. Still, the idea lingered. A few days later, an email from Maple Grove Veterinary Clinic landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "Kitten socialization class, new session starting." Curious, I opened it. "Is your new kitten turning your home upside down?" It read, "You're not alone. Join Dr. Collins and the Maple Grove team for a free small group session on kitten behavior, care, and socialization. Learn how to help your furry friend grow into a confident, well-adjusted cat and meet other new kitten parents in the process." At the bottom, there was a simple line, "We'd love to see you and Storm there." I stared at the screen. Storm, who was in the process of trying to cram himself into a shoebox that was definitely too small for him, chirped as if in approval. "What do you think?" I asked him. "Want to go to school?" He looked up at me, one paw hanging over the edge of the box, and blinked. "I'll take that as a yes," I said. I clicked RSVP before I could talk myself out of it. I told myself I was going for Storm, to help him, to make sure I was doing right by him. But if I was honest, there was another reason humming quietly in the background. I wanted to see Dr. Collins again. I had no idea, as I zipped Storm back into his carrier on the day of the class, that I was about to walk into a room that would change the shape of my future in a way that made every rainy step toward that parked car feel like it had always been leading me exactly there. The evening of the kitten class, the sky was clear for the first time in days. World outside my kitchen window was washed clean, sidewalks still damp, trees glistening, a soft golden light spilling over the tops of the houses as the sun began to sink. Storm sat on the windowsill, tail flicking, watching a bird hopping along the fence with laser-focused intensity. "You have no idea what you're in for," I told him as I set the carrier on the table and unlatched the door. New smells, new people, new cats. He glanced at the carrier with deep suspicion. "Look at me like that," I said. "This is for your social development, and maybe a little for mine." Getting him into the carrier was only marginally easier than the first time. He yowled for the first minute of the car ride, then settled into a low, grumbly mutter, as if giving a running commentary on his displeasure with my life choices. When we pulled into the Maple Grove parking lot, the setting sun cast long shadows over the cars. I spotted a couple of people heading toward the entrance with carriers of their own. One, a young man with a nervous look on his face. The other, a woman around my age with a colorful scarf and a floral carrier that looked like it belonged in a boutique window. Inside, the waiting room felt different from the last visit. Less clinical, more expectant. A small sign on the front desk read, "Kitten Class Welcome," with a cartoon drawing of a cat chasing a ball. "Hi, Laura," Kitten called when she saw me. "You can head straight back to the meeting room. Down the hall, second door on the left." "Thank you," I said, shifting Storm's carrier to my other hand. The meeting room was larger than the exam rooms, with chairs arranged in a loose circle. A few cat trees and scratching posts stood against the walls, and a table in the corner held a coffee urn, a plate of cookies, and a stack of pamphlets titled "Your Kitten's First Year." 3 other people were already there, each with a carrier at their feet. Young man I'd seen outside sat hunched over his phone, tapping nervously. Across from him, a woman in her 30s with bright pink streaks in her hair peeked into her carrier, making soft cooing noises. And near the window, the woman with the colorful scarf was adjusting the strap of her carrier, her eyes on the door. She looked up as I entered. "First time?" she asked, her voice warm. "For both of us," I said, setting Storm's carrier down and straightening. He smiled and stood, revealing a tall, graceful frame and kind, crinkled eyes. "I'm Diane," she said, extending a hand. "And this troublemaker is Luna." She nudged the carrier with her foot. Inside, I heard a faint, indignant meow. "Laura," I said, shaking her hand. "And this troublemaker is Storm." At the sound of his name, Storm let out a small MRRRP from inside the carrier, as if to confirm his reputation. "Storm," she repeated. "That's a good name. Let me guess, he arrived with bad weather." "Straight out of a rainstorm under a car," I said. She laughed. "This one showed up in my rose bushes during a heat wave," she said. "I guess some of us are just destined to find cats in dramatic circumstances." Before I could reply, the door opened again. Dr. Collins walked in, carrying a small stack of folders under one arm and a travel mug in his other hand. He wore the same navy scrubs as before, but tonight there was a slight looseness in his posture, a casualness that wasn't there during appointments. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice carrying easily in the room. "Thanks for coming to our inaugural Kitten Chaos socialization class." A ripple of laughter moved through the room, easing the tension. He set the folders on the table, then looked up, and his eyes found mine. For a moment, his face shifted into something like recognition, then a quick smile. "Hi, Laura," he said. "It's good to see you and Storm again." I felt a warm flutter in my chest. "Good to see you too," I replied. Diane's gaze slid from him to me and back again. Her eyes widened, and the corners of her mouth tipped up, the way they do when someone spots a puzzle piece clicking into place. "All right, Dr. Collins continued, turning to address the group. Let's get started. Night is all about helping your kittens, and you feel more comfortable with each other and the world. He talked about body language, about slow blinks and twitching tails, about how a cat's idea of affection doesn't always look like ours. He demonstrated how to introduce a new toy, how to give a pill without losing a finger, and how to clip claws without turning it into a wrestling match. We took turns opening our carriers and letting the kittens explore the room one at a time. Young man's orange tabby immediately climbed into a trash can and had to be rescued. The pink-haired woman's sleek black kitten stalked the perimeter like a tiny panther. Luna, Diane's kitten, emerged cautiously, then pranced to the center of the room and meowed as if addressing a crowd. When it was Storm's turn, I opened the carrier door and braced myself. He stepped out with surprising grace, sniffed my shoe, then trotted confidently toward the nearest scratching post. Within seconds, he was halfway up it, hanging on like a small gray flag. He's got good instincts, Dr. Collins said appreciatively. Strong climber. He's been training on my curtains, I said drily. A few people chuckled. As the class went on, we asked questions, shared small frustrations, and laughed at our kitten's antics. Every so often, I'd catch Diane's eye and we'd exchange a look that said, "Would you look at these little maniacs we've brought into our homes?" During a break, as we refilled coffee cups and coaxed reluctant kittens back into their carriers for a moment of calm, Diane moved to stand beside me at the refreshment table. "So," she said casually, stirring cream into her coffee, "how long have you known Dr. Collins?" "About as long as Storm has," I replied. "He was the vet on call when we first came in." She said, an amused hum in her throat. "Lucky timing." I raised an eyebrow. "He's very good with animals," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "And not hard on the eyes either," she added. I laughed, a little embarrassed. "I hadn't noticed," I lied badly. She gave me a look that said, "Sure you hadn't." "You single?" she asked, in the straightforward tone of someone who'd long since given up on beating around the bush. "Yes," I said, "for a long time now." "Me too," she said, "divorced. 15 years. She took a sip of her coffee. "I've discovered that at our age, if we don't at least name what we want, life has a way of just continuing as is." I glanced across the room. Dr. Collins was kneeling beside the young man, helping him coax his shy tabby out from behind a chair. His hands were gentle, his voice soft. "What if I'm not sure what I want?" I asked quietly. "Then start with what makes you curious," she said. "You looked like someone who was curious the moment he walked in." I considered denying it, and I thought about my daughter's words, about wanting more, and decided I was too old to waste energy pretending I wasn't human. "Maybe I am," I admitted. "Good," she said. "Curious is a beginning." By the end of the class, the kittens were tired, and the humans were a little less tense. We packed our furry charges back into their carriers, exchanged goodbyes, and promised to practice what we'd learned. As I struggled to latch the carrier, Storm had decided he'd rather ride home on my shoulder. Dr. Collins walked over. "Storm did great tonight," he said. "You both did." "He's going to sleep well," I replied. "I'm not making any promises for myself," he smiled. "We're doing another session next month," he said. "We'll focus on older cat behavior then, but Storm would qualify. You're welcome back anytime." "I think we'd like that," I said. Before I could lose my nerve, I added, "And thank you for checking in on him, and for doing this class." "It's my pleasure," he said. "Honestly, it's nice to see people who really care show up. Makes this job feel less like paperwork and more like purpose." There it was again, that word, purpose. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "This has my direct line on it," he said, holding it out. "Officially, it's for pet questions. Unofficially, well, officially is a good start." I took the card, feeling a slow flush creep up my neck. "Thank you," I said softly. "I'll try not to abuse the privilege." "I trust your judgment," he replied. "You found a kitten in a rainstorm and took him in. That says a lot." As I turned to go, Our eyes met again for a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Laura," he said. "Good night," I replied, my voice a little unsteady. "Good night, Storm." Storm gave a disgruntled meow from the carrier, as if to remind us that he, too, was present for this emotional development. On the way home, the night was clear and cool. Streetlights cast pools of yellow on the pavement, and the leaves rustled softly in the breeze. In the quiet of the car, my mind replayed the evening, the way Storm had climbed, the way Diane had smiled, the way Dr. Collins had said, "Officially is a good start." I didn't know what any of it meant yet. For the first time in a long time, I felt the sense that my life might be larger than the routines I'd built to contain it. Over the next few months, routine and surprise wove themselves together in unexpected ways. Storm grew, as kittens do, turning from a tiny scrap into a lanky adolescent with 2 big paws and endless energy. He claimed every windowsill, every box, every warm lap as his personal domain. He followed me from room to room, his presence a steady, comforting hum in the background of my days. Dr. Collins, whose first name I eventually learned was Michael, became a regular part of my world too, but in gradually expanding circles. It started with the occasional text about Storm, then a question about diet that turned into a conversation about books. He loved mysteries. I preferred family dramas. We agreed to swap recommendations. Once, when I mentioned my car was in the shop and I was worried about getting Storm to a follow-up appointment, he offered, "I passed by your street on my way in. I could swing by and pick you up." I almost said no. I almost let that old voice win, the one that says, "Don't be a bother. Don't impose. Don't take up space." Instead, I took a breath and said, "If it's really not a problem, we'd appreciate that." Sitting in the passenger seat of his car that morning, Storm's carrier wedged between us. We talked about everything and nothing. The weather, the ridiculousness of assembling flat pack furniture, how the town had changed in the last 20 years. There were quiet moments too, but they didn't feel awkward. At one point, as we sat at a red light, he said, "You know, I've been thinking about adopting again myself." "Another cat?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "I had a dog for 16 years. Lost her 2 years ago. I told myself I needed time, that I was too busy. But then people like you walk in with kittens like Storm, and I start wondering if maybe it's time to make room again." "Making room can be scary," I said softly, "but it can also be worth it." Our eyes met briefly before the light turned green. As weeks turned into months, pet conversations became life conversations. We discovered we were both divorced. Both had grown children. Both had, in different ways, learned how to build lives out of what was left after plans went sideways. He told me about the day he decided to switch from general practice to focusing on companion animals. How people had told him he was crazy to give up a more prestigious path. But I always felt better at the end of a day when I'd helped someone with a beloved pet, he said. "There's something about that bond, you can't fake it." I told him about the quiet that came after Amy moved out, after the house echoed with her absence. "I got used to the silence," I said. Told myself I preferred it. Then Storm moved in and started knocking things over at 3 in the morning. And suddenly, I realized how much life that silence had been missing. We started bumping into each other outside of appointments. It's at the farmer's market, where he was buying tomatoes, and I was staring down a display of peaches like they were a test of character. "Get the peaches," he advised. "Life is too short for resisting fruit." Another time, at the library where I worked, he appeared at my desk holding a stack of books to check out. "I'm here for cat psychology," he said, "and maybe a mystery novel or two." "You know you can't psychoanalyze them into behaving," I replied, scanning the barcodes. "True," he said. "It makes me feel better to pretend." Diane popped up here and there too, sometimes at the clinic, sometimes at the coffee shop near my house. Once, when we ran into each other at the grocery store, She glanced meaningfully at the text notification from Michael C. that lit up my phone as we chatted. "You going to pretend you don't smile every time that name pops up?" she asked. "I am not going to pretend," I said, surprising myself. "I'm just taking my time." "Good," she said. "Time is fine. Just don't confuse endless hesitation with wisdom." It wasn't one big, cinematic moment that changed everything. It was dozens of small ones, stacking up like bricks, building something neither of us had quite dared to plan for at this stage of life. The first time he came over to my house for something that wasn't pet-related, it was because Storm needed a pill, and I was losing the battle. "Would you mind?" I texted. "If you're free. If not, I'll figure it out." His reply came quickly. "I'm in the neighborhood," he wrote. "Consider it a house call." He knelt on my living room rug, Storm cradled in his arms, and with a few practiced motions, the pill was swallowed and the crisis was over. Storm hopped away, tail in the air, dignity intact. "Unfair advantage," I said. "He actually likes you." "He likes you more," Michael replied. "I'm a necessary evil. You're home." The word hung in the air. Later that evening, after he'd gone, and the house was quiet again, I stood in the doorway of the living room and watched Storm bat a toy mouse across the floor. My heart felt strangely full and fragile at the same time. I thought back to that rainy day, to the sound of a tiny cry under a car, to the feeling of a small body pressed against my chest. I thought about how one act of kindness, almost impulsive, had woven this entire new thread into my life. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I sat on my front steps with a mug of tea, watching the leaves drift down from the maple tree in my yard. Storm prowled along the railing, stopping every few seconds to swat at falling leaves, as if he could stop the season by sheer determination. I heard footsteps on the sidewalk and looked up to see Michael walking toward my house, a scarf wrapped loosely around his neck, a bakery box in his hands. "Bribery," I called. "Peace offering," he said, lifting the box. "Pumpkin scones." Storm immediately abandoned the leaves and trotted down the steps to wind around Michael's ankles. "Traitor," I told the cat. "I see how it is." Michael sat beside me on the steps, the wood cool beneath us, the afternoon light soft. "You know," he said after a moment, "I've been thinking about something." "That sounds dangerous," I replied. "Probably is," he said, "but I'm going to say it anyway." He turned to face me fully, his expression open and a little vulnerable. "When you first came into the clinic with that soaking wet kitten," he said, "I thought, here we go, another soft-hearted person who's going to have her life turned upside down by a cat." I didn't realize my life was about to get turned upside down too. My breath caught. "Michael," I began. "I know we're not 20, he went on. "We've both lived a lot of life. We've both had our hearts broken and patched back together. No, you have your routines, and I have mine. But I really like the way our routines fit together. I like that Storm expects me to show up. I like that you expect my texts. And I like you." My heart pounded in my chest like it hadn't in years. "I like you too," I said quietly, more than I was ready to admit for a while. He smiled, relief, and something deeper in his eyes. "I don't know what the next decade looks like," he said, "for either of us. But I know this, we're better at this life thing when we're not doing it alone. And I'd like, if you'd be open to it, to do more of it with you." We sat there for a long heartbeat, the sounds of the neighborhood fading into the background. A car passing, a dog barking, leaves whispering down. Storm, as if on cue, hopped into my lap, then onto his, bridging the space between us with his warm, purring body. I laughed, tears pricking at my eyes. "Look at that," I said. "The cat approves." "Oh," Michael replied softly. "He did start this." I took a breath, feeling the weight and lightness of the moment all at once. "I've been alone for a long time," I said, "on purpose. I thought it was safer that way. But then a little gray storm moved in and knocked everything off the shelves, and you started showing up at my door. And I realized safe isn't the same as alive." He reached for my hand, his fingers warm and steady around mine. "So," I said, my voice trembling just a bit, Yes, I'd like to see where this goes, together. His smile spread slowly, like the sun rising. Good, he said. I was really hoping you'd say that. We sat there, fingers intertwined, Storm purring loudly enough to be heard over the rustle of leaves. The moment wasn't cinematic in the way movies script these things. No violins, no fireworks, just two people on a front step, a cat draped across their legs, and a shared sense that something new and fragile and beautiful was beginning. If you'd asked me years ago how love might find me again, I would have imagined dating sites, or chance meetings, or being introduced by friends. I never would have said, a kitten under a car in the rain will lead him straight to your front door. But that's the thing about karma, about kindness, about the strange and wonderful ways life weaves itself together. Sometimes, you stop because you hear a tiny cry in an alley. You crouch down in the wet and offer your hand to a frightened creature you've never seen before. You take him home, feed him, clean him, give him a name. You think you're rescuing him. You think you're the one offering shelter. And then, slowly, gently, you realize he's been leading you somewhere all along. To a vet who remembers your name. To conversations that make you feel seen again. To a man who sits on your front steps and says, let's not do this alone. Storm never became a perfectly behaved cat. He still knocks things off tables. He still decides 4 a.m. is the ideal time for parkour. But every mischief, every purr, every warm weight against my legs on a cold night feels like a reminder. One small act of kindness can open doors you didn't even know were there. If you're listening to this and your life feels quiet, maybe a little too small, maybe a little too predictable, I want to offer you this. Don't underestimate the power of the moments when you choose to care, when you pull over to help, when you bring in the neighbor's trash can without being asked, when you adopt the older dog no one else wanted, when you rescue the kitten in the rain. You might just be saving a life. You might just be saving a piece of your own. And who knows, somewhere down that winding path, you might find a friend, a community, or even a soulmate you didn't think was still waiting for you. Saved a kitten from the rain, it led her to true love. That's my story. As you go back to your own day, maybe glance a little more gently at the small, inconvenient opportunities to be kind. You never know which one is carrying a thread that leads straight to the part of your life you've been quietly hoping for.